Here we go. Yes, and good morning to everybody watching us, watching this episode of Japan Expert Insights, the podcast which we do always on Wednesday morning. And today I want to introduce to you a guest speaker who hasn't been with us before. Today we are recording this episode because Madeleine Olausson is based in the UK, and we're trying to work around the time difference so that it is convenient for both of us. And that's why today we are streaming this recorded session. And Madeleine, welcome to the podcast. And thank you so very much for finding time to be with us today. I also wanted to say before I pass it over to you to tell everybody that you can find Madeleine Olausson on LinkedIn, and she is the owner of Lenao Consulting. That is her own company that works in marketing, but not only, because today we're going to talk about translation and AI translations and human translations of manga, Japanese manga. And this is a fascinating subject to me, but I have heard also friends and acquaintances talk about this because there is a lot of controversy still, and there is a lot of uncertainty about what AI is going to do to the jobs of people who translate artistic works, books, manga, and also documentation. So, Madeleine, once again, welcome, and let's see. Could you first please tell us a little bit about your company and maybe how you got involved with Japan?
Thank you, Maya. I will do, and thanks first of all for having me on your podcast today. My background is primarily in marketing, B2B marketing. I've worked with B2B marketing for many years. I did live in Japan when I was a teenager as an exchange student for a year. And 6-7 years ago, I took up my Japanese studies again and made sure to improve my level. I'm originally from Sweden. And when this opportunity was sort of given to translate from Japanese to Swedish, or rather review AI translations of Japanese manga to Swedish, I thought this was an excellent opportunity and interesting to try out. Hence, I'm doing this, although it's not my main work. My main work is B2B marketing and business development primarily.
Right. But I believe that this is also a very niche field, translating Japanese manga into Swedish, because, most of the manga that is being translated, I believe, is translated into English and maybe some of it into French and Spanish. And, right? And Swedish.
Yeah, that's correct.
market.
And it did actually surprise me a bit as well. I looked in a couple of shops in Sweden because I happened to be back in Stockholm, and I went into and had a look at a shop that did all sort of manga and sci-fi books. And it was absolutely full of people, and masses of manga. 99% of them were in English. So you could say, well, all the Swedish kids read English, but it also shows that, well, there must be a market for it if with
Right.
so very few available in Swedish. So
Indeed.
yes, so very interesting, and yes.
Well, this is just a question on a tangent here, but do you think that if the manga is translated into Swedish, then the market, or in Sweden, the manga market in Sweden will expand as compared to the English manga? That's my question.
Yes, interesting question. I think certainly for younger people, it might be easier to get into manga earlier because anyone who reads Swedish can read the manga in Swedish then. But I also think there might be a certain attraction of reading manga in English for many Swedish teens and young adults. But of course, I do hope that everyone will start reading them in Swedish and making sure there's more work for us who review the Swedish translations.
Right. And for everybody, because we know that Japanese is very different from the Indo-European languages, and most of the time it is really difficult to translate anything from Japanese to any of those Indo-European languages directly. And Swedish, I believe, is also part of that family, right? Of the Indo-European
Yes, that's
family.
correct. Yes.
Yes. So, and of course, another thing that we often talk about is the difference in culture, because, well, when we talk about cultural values that come through and they're seeing in the stories of manga, then it's also another thing, right? Another layer that everybody who translates works from one language to another needs to be aware of. So,
Hmm.
how do you feel about this? What do you think the level of difficulty of translating from Japanese into Swedish is?
Mm. Well, from a cultural point of view in manga, it's I would say it's probably knowing where to draw the line, because sometimes you feel like, oh, I probably have to explain that this is actually what's going on in this particular scene, because it can go from some activity to something else, and all of a sudden there'll be a framed photo, and anyone from Japan realize, oh, this is a funeral. But you wouldn't necessarily know that straight away if you're looking at it being a Swedish kid. You wouldn't understand straight away what was going on in that particular scene. So sometimes you really feel like, well, I probably have to put one little note here to talk about this is so and so's funeral. So then we understand from the previous page to this one that that's actually a person who has died.
Right.
Because sometimes things can be a bit understated in Japanese, and it's not necessarily always written out completely what's happening, but there are visual cues, and you'll understand from these what's going on if you know, if well, either if you are Japanese or if you know a lot about Japanese culture.
Yeah.
So very typically, anyone if you've seen, well, there'll be a decoration outside a doorway that's very particular for New Year, for instance, in Japan.
Hmm.
And that's enough to show the Japanese reader that this is New Year. You don't have to say anything about it. But for a Swede, that wouldn't be obvious. So then you might actually have to write New Year or
Right.
indicate if it's important to the story. If it's not important to the story, you sometimes can just let these things pass without mentioning.
Indeed. Because you mentioned funerals and how there are visual cues in manga,
Mm,
of course, because manga is, well, a visual storytelling, sorry.
mm,
Yes, and I remember when I first came to Japan, and my parents-in-law they had to go to a funeral, and so it was really shocking to me because they were preparing to give that gift, which is a monetary gift, which is usually given to the grieving family at funerals, right?
mm.
I was like, why is this? Because back home we never do that. So monetary gifts are not exchanged in case of funerals. And then, of course, when I talked with my husband back then, and he said, well, well, that's a way to help the grieving family. So because we are a community and we try to help them with this by just, you know, giving this the money, some
Mm,
a piece of it, to the family. And I thought, wow, this is something that honestly very few people are aware of out of Japan.
mm,
And it's once again the visual cues, but also maybe some of those customs and some of those traditions also come through
mm.
in the manga stories, I
Yes.
believe.
And talking about visual cues, something that's I often find the most challenging is all the onomatopoetic words and the mimetic words in particular in manga. So the onomatopoetic ones are the ones that have sound effects like bang, crash, wallop, which you usually get very much of in Japanese manga. But then
Hmm.
you have this other category of the more mimetic words, which is more a condition or an action that doesn't make a sound.
Hmm.
Uh, like saying someone is feeling a bit down or something, and they'll say soon, okay.
Right.
And then you have to think, okay, how do I write this in Swedish so it fits in nicely, and which word do I use to, which word did I use 3 volumes back, and
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating too, because I didn't think about that, but I also remember when I was studying Japanese, and one of my Japanese teachers, she tried to explain what potsu potsu means
hmm,
and how it differs from zaza when we talk
hmm,
about rain. And I
yes,
thought basically that was the aha moment for me,
hmm,
that in different languages we hear natural sounds in different ways.
yeah,
Right. And then, of course, if it is in English, you would say it's raining cats and dogs. It's not that you hear those animals falling
no,
down, but still the expression is different. And then,
yes,
once again, as you said, in Japanese, there are so many onomatopoeia words
hmm,
that I have noticed we do not have back home, for example, in Bulgarian language. But when we have them, they're entirely different from the sounds in Japanese.
hmm,
Yeah. And I think it once again it goes back to what you just described. It's really difficult to um, translate them from Japanese to any other language. And because today we're going to also touch upon the AI
hmm.
pro in translation, I wanted to maybe go into this direction now and say, do you think that AI translations they have the answer for these onomatopoeia words and then other words that are difficult to translate as well?
Well, funnily enough, when I do these review the AI translations, the onomatopoetic words are not included. So those I have to do
Okay.
myself from scratch. So you actually have to put in a little box in the system to first decipher what it says in Japanese, because often it'll be a bum or something that's hidden behind the main characters having a fight on the screen. So then you have to see what does it say in the katakana behind the characters, and then you have to put in a good Swedish equivalent. So
Yeah.
funnily enough, they are not included, but it may well be because it's part of the picture. So the AI only does the text itself. So all the text that goes into the speech bubbles or the chapter headings, for instance, when I review a manga.
Right. And where do you draw inspiration from when you're looking for the best equivalent in Swedish?
It can be quite tricky because also because I've lived in England for so long, I'll
Mhm.
often think about the English word straight away. Oh, that would be perfect, and then I'm thinking, what does that? And then I'll come up with a word in Swedish, and I think, well, that doesn't sound quite right. And then I'll go online and look for synonyms. So I'll look for synonyms in Swedish to a particular word, and then see what is there something better I can choose between.
Mm,
And then I'll often sit and think, and because sometimes you have to come up with a word because
right.
certain sounds, well, if it's an explosion or something dripping, or yes, yes, then there are sort of quite accepted sounds. But if someone turns around, what do you write then? Well, actually, I've ended up writing in Swedish turns around because we don't really have a suitable word for an action like that in Swedish.
Right.
But I know when I did the test translation they wanted to see the level of Japanese to Swedish understanding, and there was one particular sound for the sliding doors you have in Japanese schools, the wooden
Yeah.
doors. There's a particular sound, and I don't know how long I sat thinking, how does this sound in Swedish? And sometimes you realize you can think forever about certain words, and then you have to go away from the desk and go for a walk or something, and then you'll think, and all of a sudden you get your phone out or a notebook and write down some possible sounds.
Yeah.
But
No, it's
it's also very subjective.
it is
Sometimes
subjective.
especially the sound effects. Mm.
Yeah, because sometimes when I go back home and I talk with my friends, and in certain situations, I remember the Japanese sound, for example, for, as you say, for a sliding door, or for the rain, the way different, how can I say, rain falls down.
Mm.
We don't have them. So, and when I try to explain it, I use maybe two or three sentences.
Mm.
I end up doing that. And I think, wow, this is not really economy of expression, right? So it,
No.
yeah, it's something that we need to think about, and we spend quite a lot of time doing until we find the right expression. Because, yeah, for good or for bad. So here we have all those situational expressions as well that do not translate very well into other languages, at least not directly. But I also wanted to ask you, so before you started translating manga,
Mm.
were you a manga reader?
No, not at all. I had only read very little manga as part of. I did a translation course with Dalarna University, a university in Sweden during COVID. There was a course I could do online from the UK,
Mm-hmm.
and manga was like one lesson as part
Okay.
of a whole course. So and that had more or less been, and then I actually did my exam work with the course on manga and the use of manga in advertising actually. But
Well,
other than that, I hadn't read manga.
right.
I
And
think I
then
had. Mm.
how come you started translating manga then?
Well, it was actually from there was an email that came out from the university. So anyone who was a native Swedish speaker and who had taken that particular translation course was invited to this company to try out, do a test of Japanese to Swedish review of a
Mhm.
manga. And that's how I ended
Then
up
you got,
doing
yes.
this. Yes. I passed the test and then could start doing the proper
Yeah.
translation. Mm.
And my next question, though, is a little bit tricky because I have caught myself quite often when I go through a difficult task. I start questioning myself on the way. Why did I agree to do this? Has this happened to you? Have you ever thought, well, why did I agree to translate manga? Or why did I took on this task? You know, it's so difficult. It takes so much effort.
Yeah, well, I did already on the first volume
Okay.
because the translation test was quite a nice. You had a long period, and it was not a very long chapter. It was 35 pages, and sort of quite a confined story. It had its challenges, but still, it wasn't anything too taxing. And then you get your first volume to translate, and it's 190 pages, and it has to be done within 2 weeks. Well, I say translate is to review the translation, but of course, all of a sudden there were onomatopoetic words in almost every little box
Yes.
that you then had to go in and add manually. and sometimes it's just not the one, there'd be two, because there's something that comes crashing in through something and then it hits someone in the face. So there all of a sudden you have two sounds in that particular box alone. And then I did wonder, oh my God, why did I commit to
Right.
doing this? But once I'd got through the first one, it then gets a bit easier, because some sound effects, of course, they recur in each and every one. So once you have established a word in the first volume, you can then often reuse that for the second and the third volume again,
Right.
or at least often. Sometimes it'll be a sound effect, but if it's hitting something that's soft or something that's hard, the sound will be slightly different anyway, so you can't always use exactly the same word.
Hmm.
Yes, so yeah, so I have regretted it. But then every time I always start thinking, well, in some aspect it's also quite fun, and it's a way of keeping up to date with a certain category of Japanese.
Right. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that, because I believe that, well, inevitably at some point of time when we go really through something difficult, it's
Mm,
it's natural to regret it. But yes, okay. And then, how do you find the stories, the manga stories then? How do they differ from the stories told by Swedish authors or even by British authors?
mm,
Are there any specific differences that occur over and over? Um, have you found anything like?
mm. Well, what's amazing with the manga I review, I find it's incredibly violent, and
Oh,
people are hitting each other, and there's blood splurting. It's either dripping or splurting, and it's incredibly violent.
right.
And at the same time, I think, well, the audience they who read this kind of manga, they must be in their teens or lower teens, perhaps, and it's incredibly violent for what I believe to be the target audience. But I think this is quite a common occurrence in Japanese manga, that it's incredibly violent.
Yeah, I actually, yeah. Oh, please go on.
No, and the sort of all these explosions and people hitting each other and
Right.
mm, yeah. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But because along those lines, I remember when I think it was Kimetsu no Yaiba when it became popular here in Japan. It became a hit, and
Mm,
so everybody was watching even the TV series, and of course, my daughter, she was very much into it. And
mm,
I still think that Kimetsu no Yaiba is also on the violent side. So, and the story is beautiful. It's about family love, brother and sister's love, and everything. But at the same,
mm,
there is violence there.
mm,
And when I talked with my husband, asking him, I worry because our daughter is 5 years old, right? And why, I just don't want her to watch the stories because there is a lot of violence there too. And he was saying, but
mm,
it's just manga. Everybody knows that this is a world, it's a fantasy world, and it's not reality, right?
mm,
So in reality, we don't do this. And he was very, very okay with our daughter watching it. And actually, he and they watched it together.
mm,
And they would watch the series together. They would talk about the story, even though she was 5 years old at that time, and so on and so on. And I thought, well, it's very interesting, you see, because if it was back home, I'm sure that if I were a 5-year-old kid, my parents wouldn't let me watch it.
mm.
So, and I wonder how it is in Sweden, of course. At least I got that insight that in Japan, everybody who reads manga knows that it's a fantasy world.
Mm,
So it's different from reality. But
mm.
how do you think this, let's say, translates in Sweden? In Sweden, because as you said, there is a lot of blood in the manga you translate. There is
Yes,
violence.
and yeah, and I think it's in a way it's almost feels a bit contradictory when you think of Japan as a very orderly society where
Right.
everyone is calm, and then you open a manga where everyone's sort of killing each other and the blood splurting all over the place. So it's a little bit contradictory,
Yeah.
but it really is a fantasy world. And but I also wanted to go back to what you said about family and brother love and sister love and all that, because that's also quite a common theme. And I found in this particular volume I'm reviewing, you got exactly this. So it's incredibly this group of friends who are very loyal to each other, and
Yeah.
they value their own families, and they they have this fight about the good versus the evil, and so they're sort of people almost dying and incredibly
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
violent, but then it's always the good conquers evil somehow in the end.
Yeah. In the end, that's always,
Mm.
yeah, what happens, which is, I believe, very, let's say, hopeful.
Mm. Yes, yes. So although you go through 180 pages of violence and all these various stories and the storylines in the end, it's yeah, we won.
Right. Yeah, we won indeed.
Mm.
The good guys
Yes,
are here
exactly.
and standing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, so you mentioned that when, well, the text is run through AI translation,
Mm.
a lot of those words that are difficult to translate, they're left out. So AI doesn't care about them.
Well, I don't really know which system they use for AI, but I think it's probably because it's part of the images, so it's not it's part of the drawings and illustrations rather than the text itself. And I think that might be a technical reason why
I
anyone
see.
who reviews have to add the onomatopoetic words manually. And like perhaps that'll change as well in the future, but for now it has to be done manually.
Right. And then when it comes to other expressions, then when it is about the real text, not that
Mm.
images, have you found any, let's say, inconsistencies between the Japanese and the Swedish translation done by AI there?
Well, there are some things that, because very often the AI translation, it is correct in a sense. It has translated one box of Japanese words to, in a way, correct Swedish, but it's not the Swedish first of all, the teenager would speak necessarily. So
Hmm.
it may where very often you have to change the words used because sometimes it sounds incredibly polite, which it's not a level you'd use in this particular target audience, or the character wouldn't necessarily speak like that in Swedish. And the main thing is that all translations are literal. It translates exactly what it says in Japanese into Swedish, and sometimes it's perfectly fine, but it's often sometimes, well, Oji-san is translated as grandfather, but in this storyline it was actually the boy's father. It's just that he was a bit older. So
Right.
the son called him Oji-san instead of Oto-san. So and there are things like that that the system wouldn't know because it translates literally. And that's I think that's the main thing. It's so literal. It's correct in one sense, but you really have to review what it says in Japanese, and does this sound good in Swedish, and does it mean the same things, or are there different nuances? Because sometimes if you translate literally, it doesn't also always make sense, because they can use a set expression in Japanese that makes absolutely no sense in Swedish, and then you just have to try and find an equivalent in Swedish instead.
Indeed, yeah. So, which tells us that context is still not translated there, right?
No, context is very important. And I will say there are things that the AI translations do improve and they get better. And of course, I'm now on volume 4, and things are corrected in the first volume. I don't always need to correct in these volumes because it's obviously been fed into the system.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some things that happen quite often, especially in Japanese. They often leave a subject out. You don't need to have a subject in a sentence. It can be several sentences in a row, and a Japanese person will know who they're speaking about. But sometimes when you get to the manga and you've moved 2 pages along, you actually need to insert a subject, so the reader know who's talking and or what you're talking or who you're talking about.
Yeah, in Indo-European languages, once again, it comes naturally. We verify who is the agent and who is the receiver of the action, very clearly, even well, without paying much attention to or being conscious about it, right? Well, yes, in Japanese, it's quite difficult. And I have also noticed some of my Japanese friends, when they continue the conversation, they continue using sentences without a subject, but on the way, eventually that misunderstanding comes. It occurs because the person talking obviously starts talking about the other person, but the other person thinks that the speaker is still talking about themselves. So I would say that even for Japanese people, sometimes it can be confusing, let alone those who are not used to the way Japanese language, let's say, operates, right?
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting because once again, you have to go through the whole story and be aware of the context so that there are no mistakes there.
No, exactly. And then sometimes there'd be a subject inserted, and it could actually be the wrong gender. Because I think AI has a inclination of including everything as him or he, or very often, and which is probably a whole separate discussion. But very often, oh, you refer to a teacher as him, but actually it's clearly a her. And then you have to edit that as well. So yes.
Indeed. Well, it also we come to another thing about biases in AI, because those usually we think that the agents of actions, especially if it is an action story or novel or anything, so that's a man, and if there is violence, usually it is, you know, a man and this and that, and most of the time the what's that, I cannot come with the word exactly, the protagonists, they are men, right? But it happens that in manga stories, quite a lot of stories actually have female protagonists too.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's another thing which I think are basically we are not aware of them until we start working on the subject.
Yes, then you see the biases quite clearly.
Yeah. And okay, so I also wonder, there is another thing, because in Japanese, of course, in the stories, the manga stories, most of them they use the colloquial
Yeah.
Japanese. But sometimes, of course, there are honorific expressions as well.
Mm.
How do you see those honorific expressions translated into Swedish? And is it possible to translate them and well, maybe if it is not possible, then what happens there?
Yes, well, very. It's a little bit tricky because just well, in Sweden people use hardly no titles at all. Unless you're the king or an ambassador or something, you'll use a title. Otherwise, you certainly don't use any title. So if we'll say Takanaka-san in a manga, i.e. someone's last name and son, the son falls off straight away. You don't use any title. You wouldn't even say Mr. Takanaka in Swedish. You'd just say Takanaka, or even you'd actually say the person's first name if you know it. So
Yeah.
so all the sun disappears. Would drop all sun, kun, chan. All these disappear in Swedish because we haven't got any titles in Swedish, so there's no way to use them and refer them. You can sometimes do a little bit of rewrite to include something like chan to say it's little or cute so and so, but unless it's someone's, I have included a title of someone, and that's when the person is the director of a school, and there it felt like, well, there you can actually use the title and the last name of this particular person, but otherwise all titles are dropped.
Right.
And it's quite tricky in because very often it's very colloquial, and then in the text and the spoken words in manga, and then you'll have a situation where all of a sudden someone will start speaking a bit more polite and use the decimus forms in Japanese, and then you think, we have two different words for you in Swedish, and one of them is so polite, and people stopped using that form back in the 60s. And
Hmm.
like it's the sort of polite you used to use when you spoke to elder people or to being more polite. So it's, sometimes you just can't use this distinction in the Swedish version. Because if I would use the very polite version of Swedish, it can almost become sound sarcastic rather than the person
Indeed.
being speaking in a polite way.
Yeah, I think that's the case with Bulgarian as well. I mean, we still use the one of the words, the polite expression for you, for people we don't know or people who are, well, for clients and
Mm,
also teachers, doctors, and
mm,
so on, elderly people as well. But if you suddenly switch from, the more familiar one to that polite one, it sounds very sarcastic, and people usually think, what are you thinking?"
mm,
Yeah, and then
mm,
right, but then also, don't you think that because of this difficulty to translate the more polite expressions on the way, to translate them and incorporate that change into the story, do you think that some of the nuance is lost?
yes, definitely. I think there are nuances lost in translation.
Mm,
But
I
then,
see.
of course, another question is how much does the viewer or the reader lose by not knowing? Because, of course, the reader doesn't know what it says in Japanese. So for them, it may not be a major loss that they don't see that nuance.
Hmm.
But as a translator, you feel it's a certain loss when you
Yes.
can't put it across.
Yeah. Right. Well, you don't know what you don't know, right?
No,
That's
that's true. That's true.
it when it comes to the readers. But still, because you're the medium between the original and well, the final product in another language, there is always that hesitation of what to do.
Yes, exactly. And then once you've reviewed something several times, you will sometimes start questioning yourself. Does this sound correct? Because you've read it so many times, and you think, does this really sound correct? And then often you have to sit and read something out to yourself and see, yeah, that sounds correct. Or I have to go online and check that the word really does exist.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then in this line of thought, also we know that Japanese is, let's say, it also very often leaves certain things unsaid. And
Mm.
of course, you mentioned that often Japanese sentences do not use a subject when the
Mm.
subject is understood uh,
Mm.
in the situation. But not only that, the Japanese basically, when you speak Japanese, people say that it is more important to pay attention to the things that are not said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to those
Yeah.
that are explicitly said.
Yes.
And so, how do you deal with this? Because I imagine that Swedish, like other Indo-European languages, again,
Mm.
more explicit. So there is, once again, there is a gap between the Japanese way of not expressing things and
Mm.
Swedish, which is more on the descriptive side.
Yes. Yes. And then it gets back a little bit to where to draw the line when you translate, because sometimes I do feel, well, unless I write clearly that that sound means that someone's closed the door, and then I can either, well, if I write there that the door is closed, then it means that that person has actually left the room and gone out. And
Mm-hmm.
then, depending on the context and what's available in each square, then you can see, well, would a reader understand that from seeing that picture? Well, possibly, because they see that there's one person left in the room and they were two earlier. So then if I just write door closing
Mm-hmm.
on that onomatopoetic sound, then I would guess that the reader understands that that means that one person has actually left the room.
Yeah. You know, a strange idea just came up now in my head because okay, so sometimes we cannot translate onomatopoeic words, right?
Mm.
And like you said you always have to decide what the what to do basically, whether to leave it out or to explain it or to find a word which is is used in such situations in Swedish. But then, so I'll start with this. We have Japanese foods, different Japanese foods, like natto, for example,
Mm.
and tofu. And in the beginning, when the world opened its eyes to Japanese food, people tried to use descriptive expressions about that.
Mm.
So they would say fermented soybeans for nut,
Mm.
or they would say, let's say that's soy, like curd, which is made of soy
Yes, yeah,
milk,
bean curd or something
bean
similar. I
curd.
think that used to
Yes,
be
something
used for
like that.
talking. Mm.
Indeed. And now we have come to the point where most everybody around the world knows what natto is and what
Mm.
tofu is. And even though they're not native to Japan, people just don't ask anymore what it is. They use
Mm.
the Japanese words for them.
Yes.
So, do you think that such thing could happen actually with onomatopoeic words, the Japanese words?
It may well, because some words, if you don't have a clear Swedish word for it, sometimes it's just written the Japanese version. So it'll say bun in the background very often, and then you just write BAM in Swedish, BAM. It's quite similar. It sort of works. And it
Right,
turned out that there were already quite a few set expressions for onomatopoetic words
right.
into Swedish that have been established by other translators.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure that there are ones that, in a way, will translate and always be used in Japanese. But I also think it's an area where the manga writers tend to be quite creative and come up with all new variants and add the number of vowels or syllables that go on in this bang 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 sequence. It's
Right.
yeah. So yeah, but I certainly it's quite interesting because I did look at I found an old version, some old manga that had been translated to Swedish when I was in Stockholm last year. And I looked at it, and there was a very clear description of some particular food or something, what it was, and there was a long description underneath what this was. But this was a manga from at least more than 10, 15 years back, translated to
Mhm.
Swedish. But
Yeah.
yes.
Well, we'll see what happens. And also, I wanted to ask you because I think that, of course, nowadays Japanese manga is becoming more popular
Mm,
in the Western world. But when do you think that the manga boom started in Sweden and I guess in Britain because you also have lived in Britain for
mm, many
so
years, yes.
yeah,
Well, I wonder if it's been there perhaps as a bit of an undercurrent, a bit longer than I was aware of, and when
hmm,
Japanese soft power started spreading around the world. Because it was quite interesting when I did my online translation Japanese to English course with the university during COVID. Many of the other participants were in their early 20s, and they had all got an interest in Japanese by having read manga and watched anime.
I s-
So all of a sudden, there was a generation of people who've got their interest in Japanese from having read manga, whereas people in my age group would normally have come to Japanese through judo or karate or something. That used to be the way a few years earlier, but now there's a whole generation who's actually had
right.
such a strong interest in manga that they started learning Japanese based on it.
Oh, that's interesting because I was not aware of that dynamic. I mean, like, of course, we meet a lot of people nowadays, as you say, people in their 20s who say, I want
Mm,
to go to Japan because I love manga, I love
mm,
anime. And I was kind of aware of this trend, but I never thought of how maybe 10 or 15 years ago people got involved or interested in Japan and its culture as well.
mm,
Because I remember when before I came to Japan, Japan was really, really that very far away country that we didn't know almost anything about. Of course, back home, back then, there wasn't much information about the country per se. Of course, we had watched Shogun, the series,
mm,
and we knew that the Japanese loved ikebana and martial arts as well, but that was more or less all. So, and now, as you say, it's a different soft power.
it is.
That's right. Yeah. And again, I want to go back to one of my questions in the beginning. So, how do you think that the, let's say, the issues and the stories of manga, when I say issues, that's the, the, let's say, social issues that manga looks into and talks about. How do they differ from the stories that European authors, let's say also Swedish authors nowadays write about?
Mm, um, yeah, I wonder if the themes are quite often similar. You have loyalty and friendship and looking after your family and all that, but the degree of violence is very different between manga and other sort of. Don't know if you you could really compare them to because any comic books in Sweden used to be Donald Duck. You don't. There might be other ones now, and then it's a completely different story compared to a manga
Mhm.
of today.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, because I also remember that my generation, for example, we thought that comic books were for children,
Mm,
not for adults or even young adults. So
mm,
they were the stories of Disney and also some Russian anime and also Czech anime, German and French anime. But they were stories for children. And now suddenly that has changed. Maybe not so
mm.
sudden, actually.
No, it's probably been, and I think it's also might be a generation of people who started reading manga and they continue reading manga as they
Mm,
grow older. I think you probably get quite a lot of people now who don't stop at a certain age, but they follow with the series.
right. And so, well, I imagine it is the case in Sweden that the demand for manga has increased in, well, in recent decade, maybe for the past 10 years or so.
Yeah,
Um,
well, based on my one visit to one of the manga shops in Sweden,
mhm,
I was quite amazed to see how full it was of people and the assortment and all the titles available. A whole shop with manga alone. Okay, this was in central Stockholm, so it probably got a big market there. But still, it was quite extraordinary to see all the manga available and the
right.
interest in it. Mm.
Yeah. No, I'm saying this because when I came to Japan 24 plus years ago, so it was a bit shocking to me to see adults really sitting in the on the train and reading manga.
Yeah,
Exactly
the
for
comic books that used to
the
be
comic books, yes.
that thick and yes.
Yeah. And
Mm.
now it seems that, well, it's common all over the
Mm.
world, right?
Yeah.
Sweden, in Europe, I have friends in France who read a lot of Japanese comic books, a lot of manga there as well. And
Mm.
yeah, watch anime a lot.
Yes, and you even see in the bookshops here in the UK, in my favorite bookshop, they have it even says manga now. It doesn't say comic books. It's called a manga, the headline, and then you have several shelves of Japanese comic books translated to English.
Right.
Manga is its own section. Mm.
Yeah. My next question is, do you think that translating Japanese is easier, translating it to English is easier than translating it to Swedish?
Hmm. I think, in one way, because Swedish is my native language, that I I in a way can sort of change and vary the language more in Swedish, but also by living in the UK, uh, I think the English words come so often straight away and
Right.
naturally because I think more often in English than I do in Swedish. So I'm not sure there's a clear-cut answer to that
Oh no, but
question.
it's, yeah, it's once again interesting because whenever I talk with people who speak more than one language, right? Uh,
Hmm.
even sometimes when they're not in their native language environment, they use a different one. The words that come to, well, to them in different situations are always those of their linguistic environment, the current environment.
Hmm.
And I think that I remember, for example, before I came to Japan, and my mother would be like, "And don't forget Bulgarian, don't forget to speak Bulgarian," you know. And I'm like, "How can I forget to speak my native language?" And of
Hmm.
course, I haven't forgotten to, well, how to speak Bulgarian. But sometimes it's easier for me to come up with, for example, with the Japanese word nowadays,
Hmm.
because in that specific situation, the Japanese has a better expression
Hmm.
than the Bulgarian language, and vice versa, of course, you know.
Yes,
Oh,
and I did that the only the other day when I told my English partner about a word in Swedish that described exactly what we were talking about. That when you're sometimes, if it's Thursday, but you think it's Wednesday, and
right.
we have a word for that in Swedish. I've never known a word for that in English, and I don't think he's known it either. So I told him, well, that's what we call veckovill in Swedish. That's when you don't know what day of the week it is. And we have one word for it in Swedish.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really a fascinating phenomenon, right? How our brains work too.
Yes,
So
exactly.
yeah. Wow, great. And then my next question is, do you or what are your next projects? So are you still continuing with the same manga series, or are you taking on a different project? And is it once again from Japanese to Swedish, or maybe from Japanese to English?
Well, with this particular company, my contract is from Japanese to Swedish, and I do one volume at a time, and I'm now on volume 4, and I believe there are 10 volumes in this series, so I'll have a few more to go through. And of course, it also depends on the end customer's demand, if they ask for more titles to be translated to Swedish or not. But then, of course, this is only a part-time project for me that I do when I'm not working on my marketing projects, because it's the sort of thing, sitting and review a Japanese to Swedish translation you can do any time of day or any weekday. It doesn't matter so much when you do it. It's
Indeed.
but it's a nice way to keep your Japanese up to date, and certainly colloquial Japanese.
Very much so. And it's maybe a crazy question, but do you think that this work at the moment, I mean, what you're doing with manga and the translation from Japanese to Swedish, do you think that it can be helpful also, or it is helpful with your marketing projects?
Well, possibly, because I use my brain in a different way when you sit and review translations, and you have to think and be creative. And you certainly have to be creative from a linguistic point of view, and correct any errors and details you'd be or capabilities that are good to have when you do the marketing activities themselves, and the marketing communications part of marketing.
Right. Because personally, I have noticed this works for me, and I don't know, maybe for other people it works in different ways. But when I work or when I use my brain for projects in different fields, so at some point the dots connect in a strange way. And the strangest of, I come up with the strangest of ideas, but some of them do work. So that's why I asked you this question, just because it's, I believe that no experience goes, goes unnoticed and goes vain.
Yeah, and it might not always be conscious, but in a subconscious manner, it's and for me, it's also very valuable, because it means I work on different projects and in different areas all the time.
Right. Great. Well, I think that we are just a minute and a half away before the end of today's session. So thank you so very much for sharing all these insights about translation and about manga and different projects as well. So I appreciate it. And
Thank you very much for having me, Maya.
oh, it was a pleasure. And of course, I want to have you again. And next time we're going to talk about a different topic. So, yes, well, please do come again. And
Thank you very much. Looking forward to our next conversation.
yeah, me too. To everybody who watched us, thanks a lot. And have a great midweek. And also stay with us. Come again. We'll be here next Wednesday again. Thanks a lot. And that's not everything for today, but most of it. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.